All right, ladies and gentlemen, today it is Monday, April 27th, and we are going to talk about the events that started World War II in Europe and in Asia, and then how the war progressed in its earliest years. This is your note page for today. What I would like you guys to do right now is take a look at this political cartoon so that we can review a little bit what you learned last week about the events that brought Europe to the start of World War II. We'll review them together and go from there. All right, you are done reviewing this cartoon. You paused it for a moment. This cartoon is making reference to Adolf Hitler's aggressive actions prior to World War II, after he became the Chancellor of Germany in the early 1930s until 1940. So the first thing you notice in this cartoon, certainly probably right from the beginning, you have Adolf Hitler. And you know it's Adolf Hitler because he's wearing a Nazi armband. He's got his characteristic hair combed to the side and his Adolf Hitler mustache, the small mustache, and he is marching his way to becoming the boss of the universe. He's marching his way to taking over the world. And he has taken a couple steps toward this eventual goal of his. Those steps are rearming his country, rearmament, building up its military, developing new military technology like new tanks and airplanes, and building up the German Navy, fortifying the Rhineland, which means that he was putting troops and the military in the Rhineland, which was a territory that bordered France, rearming Germany and refortifying this area called the Rhineland were both violations of the Treaty of Versailles, and he should have been stopped at some point for doing those types of things. He should have been reprimanded and he should have been stopped. And then he's also taking a step onto Danzig. Danzig was a city that bordered Poland. It was supposed to be an independent city. It wasn't supposed to be part of any country at that time, and it had been taken from Germany. Most of the people in Danzig were German, and Adolf Hitler in the late 1930s proclaimed that he wanted Danzig to be part of Germany again. And you can see that the artist is concerned that he's going to take even more steps to eventually become the boss of the universe, of taking over the world. And he's not just taking these steps on flat ground, where he's not taking these steps on just nothing. He's taking these steps on the spineless leaders of democracy. And this is a reference to appeasement. That basically the fact that Britain and France and even the United States, the fact that no one around the world stood up to Adolf Hitler as he made these aggressive acts and prepared for war and prepared for global expansion, no one tried to stop him. So the artist is being very critical of that. And the artist is suggesting that, in fact, by not standing up to Adolf Hitler, that these people were actually allowing Adolf Hitler to eventually take over the world. Perhaps the most famous example of appeasement, or the most criticized even at the time that it occurred, was an event called the Munich Conference. And at the Munich Conference, the leader of Great Britain met with Adolf Hitler in Munich to discuss some of these aggressive actions that Adolf Hitler had taken. And the most recent one was that Adolf Hitler had taken this territory here called the Sudetenland. And the Sudetenland was supposed to be a piece of territory that was not taken from Germany as part of the Treaty of Versailles. The leader of Great Britain, Neville Chamberlain, met with Adolf Hitler in Munich to talk about what he had just done, to tell him, hey, you can't take any more land. The world is going to stand up to you if you continue to take more territory. Neville Chamberlain said, you can keep this territory here called the Sudetenland. It's in lines here. He said, if you, Adolf Hitler, promise not to take over any more territory. Adolf Hitler agreed. Neville Chamberlain flew home. He told everyone that we avoided peace. Everything is going to be fine. Adolf Hitler's not going to take any more territory. And then 6 months later, March 1939, Adolf Hitler takes even more territory here. And then eventually into Slovakia, 1939. And at that point, Great Britain and the rest of the world said, that is enough, Adolf Hitler and Nazi Germany. If you take any more territory, if you take Danzig, if you take Poland, then we will actually be at war. At the same time that all of this was happening, that Adolf Hitler was building up his army and preparing his country for war and getting ready to take over territories in and around all of Europe. Adolf Hitler and other fascist totalitarian dictators in Italy and Japan were actually making alliances with each other, preparing to go to war, to expand all of these countries. And this is a significant event because each of these countries, Italy, Japan, and Germany all had the same goal. All three wanted to build up their armies, expand and take new territory, and by forming military alliances and promising to support each other, they were preparing to fight a global conflict of expansion, to expand and take over the world. And in the 1930s, we saw each of these countries take a great deal of territory. Japan they had taken Korea in the early 1900s, but they invaded northern China, this Manchurian territory, in the earliest part of in the earliest 1930s. And they had their eyes set on northern China. And they actually invaded China. World War II in Asia started when Japan and China fought at the Marco Polo Bridge, and that was just north of Beijing, the capital city of China. Italy, of course, took over. If this map extended down here, they took over and invaded Ethiopia in the 1930s, and then in 1939 annexed Albania. Germany, we know, throughout the 1930s, and especially 1937, 38, and 39, expanded and took territory by refortifying the Rhineland and then starting to annex territory in what at the time was Czechoslovakia and Austria, and then they set their sights on Poland in 1930. As with everything else throughout the 1930s, the German military was developing a new strategy for fighting war. Basically, the German military, because of the technological advances they made to tanks and airplanes, developed a strategy called Blitzkrieg. And in Blitzkrieg had two components. First, tanks and infantry attacked specific locations along their opponent's border to burst through the enemy lines, at the same time as airplanes bombed civilian targets, cities, hospitals, schools, roads, behind enemy lines to create chaos and havoc, with the intention of eventually allowing the ground forces to burst through the enemy's lines and then encircle the opposing defenses and then force surrender. And what you guys are going to do now is, we've watched this video. This is a very short, quick lesson. You guys are going to answer these 1, 2, 3, 4 questions about the start of World War II in Europe. Answer this question here: what was Blitzkrieg? And then you're going to watch this video and look at this map here to figure out whether or not this new German strategy of Blitzkrieg was successful and explain how you know. On Wednesday, we will come back here and we will talk about the United States and how the United States responded to these acts of aggression by these totalitarian fascist dictators, and then how the United States responded as World War II started.